Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues as well. Today we're going to talk about India and United Kingdom's free trade agreement, which is being negotiated between both the nations. Now, in January this year, India and UK had formally launched talks for a free trade agreement to boost bilateral trade and investments. Now, top government officials have been quoted by media reports saying negotiations for the proposed trade pact between India and UK are moving in the right direction and both sides are expected to reach an agreement soon. Both countries share strong bilateral economic relationship with great potential for growth in both goods and services. Strong Indian community presence of over 1.6 million expatriates forming less than 2% of the UK's total population, but contributing over 6% in GDP, plays a very important role in promoting bilateral trade and investment. In fact, investment is the key part of India-UK bilateral relationship. Major Indian companies are present in the UK market and some new entrants are also increasing their foothold there. United Kingdom, on its part, has also remained keen on exploring the potential of Indian market. So today we'll try and understand as what do both the countries have to gain in terms of this free trade agreement. What are the key discussion points, negotiation points as far as this agreement is concerned, and where do we stand? And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us in the studio Professor Abhijit Das, Center for WTO Studies at IIFT. Welcome, Professor Das. We're also joined by Dr. Rajan Sudesh Ratna, Deputy Head of the United Nations ESCAP. And we have with us Mr. Jiten Nath Mishra as well, former ambassador, who is joining us. Welcome to you as well, Ambassador Mishra. I'll in fact like to begin with you only, Ambassador Mishra, because of the recent developments, political developments in United Kingdom, which has come to light. We all know that the Home Secretary had resigned. But the news which is coming in is that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is also stepping down. So in the light of these developments, what is likely to be the impact on these negotiations, the UK-India FTA negotiations?
The negotiations in any case are in an advanced stage, and that has been stated by the British side, by the British Trade Minister just a couple of days back. So a lot of the nuts and bolts of the details have perhaps already been negotiated. So they usually in diplomacy, as you know, we wait for the big moment, like a summit or a meeting of ministers to announce a deal. And Diwali would have been a very good occasion. So if the Prime Minister is going to resign, it will perhaps delay it somewhat as far as some limited agreement is concerned, because as I said, even if the negotiations are almost done, there are still some sticking points over migration and mobility. Okay. As we know, we had the Migration and Mobility Partnership announced during the virtual summit in June 2021 between the two prime ministers. And there are complaints on both sides that the other side is not honoring commitments under that. And the British side, Suella Braverman, who just resigned, she said publicly that the Indians have not taken back undocumented workers, undocumented Indians, and India immediately had a riposte saying that no, whatever list they gave us, we have been doing it diligently. However, we also have concerns about implementation of their part of the agreement on the partnership. So there is considerable to and fro and haggling, which is very common in diplomacy. So that will happen. But the question is, in any case, there can't be a complete deal unless this issue of migration and mobility is sorted out. Okay. That is a kind of a red line for India. No migration, no deal, no complete deal. But an incomplete deal, as I said, was very much on the cards. Perhaps that can still be done, we don't know, because it is possible to a limited deal by postponing these difficult issues to a later negotiation. Okay,
we'll have to wait and watch on that front as to whether the incomplete deal will be acceptable to both sides, or will there be agreement on these contentious issues like the issue of migration and the issue of data localization as well. Let me also bring in Dr. Ratna here. If we have to understand this aspect of the political crisis which is right now there in United Kingdom, how do you think that is likely to play out and has an impact on this deal? Because ultimately, any deal will have to be done by the government, and if the government is not stable out there, the first it was the Chancellor, then the Home Secretary, now the Prime Minister herself.
Well, thank you. As Ambassador Mishra also said, it is expected that to certain degree it will be little slow because understand most of these regional trading agreements and the engagements, and especially when UK now has started, it's their geopolitical compulsion. They were part of EU, now they are out, so they want to get all what was available to them as a part of EU to continue even after Brexit. That is the reality. But in that, for any democratic government or any government in that sense, for an agreement which will have a legally binding commitments to be made, you require those commitments to take back to your legislative framework, get it approved. Now, definitely that process will delay because if there is instability in the government, you do not know. The second thing is if the Prime Minister and a majority of the cabinet right now know, but if that happens, it also depends because sometimes in these negotiations, and often it has been seen, that the head of the government or the Prime Minister of the government and his or her thinking also reorients all the negotiation process.
Continuity, which you point
I
out.
mean, whether continuity or discontinue, I mean, it can happen. So there were people who were very, open, liberal, and then the person changed, and all of a sudden the country took a U-turn because that head of a state or a nation felt that no, I need to have protectionism, and there are cases in recent years which has happened. So much will also depend on who succeeds. Then definitely if that happens, their interest would be there to sign an agreement with India and implement. Large market, trade interests are there, economic interests are there, geopolitical interests are also there. But the timing, perhaps it may be a little bit slow.
Okay, continuity, of course, is one major issue out here because decision will have to be taken by the government of the day. Now, if you look at the timeline of this FTA, the Free Trade Agreement, it was Boris Johnson who was the then Prime Minister of United Kingdom, who, along with our Prime Minister, had come to an conclusion that both sides need an FTA, and let's further thresh out the details, negotiate further, and all that. After that, Liz Truss, came to office, and comments made by her Home Secretary seems to have, put in a bit of an obstacle to this deal. The Home Secretary resigned. The Prime Minister also resigns. Now there will be a new Prime Minister as well. So this kind of, instability, political instability, because it looks like there will be more focus on the domestic issues rather than, perhaps focusing on deals like these.
Thanks, Vishal, for having me on your program. You're very right that if there is political instability, it will make striking deals such as a free trade agreement much more onerous, much more difficult. On its part, India may be a bit hesitant to grant concessions, not fully confident whether the next incoming government would be able to respect those concessions or not. Within the UK side itself, it remains to be seen whether there will be complete continuity in their approach towards the FTA. So we are certainly getting into an uncertain terrain. As Professor Ratna mentioned, lot of imponderables get thrown up when there is political instability, and we are really in an uncharted territory. We can keep our fingers crossed, but at the same time, let's not bemoan missed deadlines. That's part of any trade negotiation.
Okay.
We should look at this as an opportunity to have a detailed review of the progress achieved so far, and if there is a need to recalibrate our negotiating approach, our position on some of the difficult issues such as digital trade or trade and environment, or maybe in the traditional sectors such as manufacturing, maybe now's the time to do it. So
Okay.
let's take advantage of this hiatus, this opportunity to have a relook at our position and see how best we can protect, project, promote our national interests.
Okay, okay. Now that you're talking about, the core aspects there, Professor Das, Dr. Ratna, let's look at key points. Migration is one issue, Mr. Mishra pointed out. Another is, of course, issues like, dealing with the environment, climate change, the commitments there as well. On trade also. Data localization also seemingly is one area where, India doesn't seem to be in a mood to go ahead and, give more leeway than it believes it is beneficial to its own interests.
You see, best Abhijit to answer because he has been working on this. But India's concerns on these data security, localization, etc., has been known, and it's not only with UK. Even in the WTO, India in the e-commerce negotiation has many concerns relating to data localization, use, selling, how confidentiality, or what are the aspects which are there, and they have not been addressed to a certain extent. So those issues remain and are valid. Still, the challenge which I see is many of the countries who have or who are going ahead have many of their domestic legislations in place.
Okay.
So you can, to a certain extent, piggy bank on saying that, okay, if I have to do this, it will go against my domestic legislation or national laws, and therefore you can do some kind of an assessment. Most of the time in India, while we have taken historically all the external reforms, the domestic reforms are not at par, at pace with what we have done.
Okay.
And this is also one of the challenges here. I mean, I won't look at UK, I won't look at e-commerce, I don't look at the WTO outcome. Today, what happens to the data security if it's in a Indian server or a US server or a China server? How are you controlling it? Are you controlling it? You're not in a control.
Okay.
Now, unless you bring those reforms domestically, discuss, take a stock, start working towards that, perhaps it may be difficult because what comes in the mind, the first thing is a fear of unknown.
Okay.
You do not know where you are venturing. It's a dark room. It may be a bright light once you go after that room, or you may end up sitting in a dark cell. That perhaps is a dilemma with with Indian negotiators, policymakers.
Okay.
And I think this would be, as Abhijit was saying, perhaps this is a time to take stock if there is some delay there in the process of discussions of a UK.
And then put in place domestic
And
safeguards as well.
putting them perhaps may not be that easy. You cannot bring them in 1 month or 2 months. But at least kick-starting a process, or at least understanding what kind of domestic legislative changes you require to bring would be essential.
Okay, and that gives us an idea in terms of making commitments to other nations as well in such agreements. Professor Das, quickly before I go to Mr. Mishra, on the data localization part, as Dr. Ratna is saying, and it is seeming light as well, because just a few days back we also had a very detailed discussion on the issue of data localization, and it is pretty much clear that yes, there needs to be a robust mechanism which is to be put in place, and the work is, the legislative work on that is already ongoing, discussion papers, consultations with all stakeholders, that's going on.
Absolutely true, and that is what will facilitate our striking a deal with UK. But in the arena of digital economy, if we look at some of the past FTAs of UK or European Union, apart from data localization, there's another issue which has largely escaped attention, and to my mind that issue is very important. The background of that issue is how to give a fillip to your own domestic startups. The way to do it is, one way to do it is by sharing government data with them, and that is what will address asymmetry in data between our startups and, let's say, the big digital players.
Okay.
So sharing government data can be one way of addressing the asymmetry and helping our digital ecosystem to get a boost. Now the problem here is some of the provisions in existing FTAs of European Union or UK can put restrictions on this ability. And why this is important is I just wanted to refer back to a newspaper item a couple of days ago, where our MOS in Mighty Ministry was quoted as saying that if we share government data with our startups, that can lead to commercial activity in the range of $200 to $500 billion.
Okay.
Now, if this potential gets in some manner hampered by our FTA commitments, then that should be a problem which we need to ponder over. So apart from data localization, I think another area which could create a problem for us in the FTA negotiations with be it UK or be it EU is this idea of open government data and sharing of government data with Indian entities and then being required to share it with our FTA partners as well.
Okay, that's a very significant aspect. Let me take that to Ambassador Mishra as well. Ambassador Mishra, you spoke about the issue of migration, but as both the gentlemen, Dr. Ratna and Professor Abhijit, are also pointing out the significance of issues like data localization and data security as well in these times of digital economies. How significant or important do you think they are vis-a-vis not only this FTA, this free trade agreement which is being negotiated, but perhaps future FTAs as well, which we might negotiate with other countries, other nations, or other blocs as well?
Well, I'm not an expert on data, but I will say as far as my knowledge is concerned, that India has historically not been able to negotiate good FTAs in trade. With the ASEAN, we didn't do trade with services. We did just trade and they got the benefit. And our companies are also a little bit ignorant about what is available under these agreements. They don't do the homework and take advantage of opportunities. So part of the problem lies with us. But I don't want to talk so much about the technical thing. I would like to revisit the political and the strategic parameters of a possible agreement. What are these? Britain with Brexit is looking for new partners. India with China, so preponderant in the region, politically, economically, militarily, strategically, is looking for new partnerships. So it makes eminent sense for these two sides to reach a comfortable and wide-ranging FTA, not just a limited FTA, for their own reasons, and with the British tilt towards the Indo-Pacific also. So everything falls into place. And I think that there is an understanding between the governments on the broad parameters of a deal, as I said in the beginning. However, I feel also that migration and mobility is the biggest sticking point. Data, of course, is there. Risky also. I mean, we want, Britain wants lower tariffs and we want more local content in British whiskey, Indian content, value addition in India. So these are some details. They want Indian government contracts and they demand higher labor standards and environmental adhering to basic environmental norms, etc. And they want relaxation on rules of origin. Now, these are more technical things. But for us, I think the most important thing is migration and mobility. Migration and mobility means three things. One is allowing skilled workers. We already have the parameters of a deal. And Britain seems to have conceded to me through the Migration and Mobility Partnership 3,000 Indian skilled professionals a year without labor market tests. But the quid pro quo which we had to concede, as Suella Braverman mentioned before she resigned, is we have to take back undocumented Indians. They are claiming we are dragging our feet on undocumented Indians, and we are saying they are dragging their feet on taking these 3,000 a year. The other thing related to that is very important. Post-study work visas for students, because this is a major issue for Indian students, and also salary caps. We have been demanding lowering of salary caps for employment opportunities in the UK. They have already addressed some of these issues. That's what I'm trying to say. So strategically, I think the conversation needs to be more on what is possible, not on who is there in power in Britain and how they hinder that possibility from happening. I don't think that's a major issue, meaning A or B or C could be the Prime Minister tomorrow, but I think there is a broad understanding. We need to understand that, and across the board, cross-party. The Labour, one of the Labour shadow ministers I read the other day welcomed the FTA because they need to do this with India. They said it's a very good thing to happen. And all this haggling is, of course, going to happen. Indians are expert negotiators on trade, and the British are very hard taskmasters historically, having had imperial sway over most of the world for 2 centuries. They know the game very well, and we are learning very fast. So I think some kind of a deal is possible. And if Liz Truss survives the next few days, it could be possible before Diwali.
Okay. Well,
or even without it could be possible.
okay. No, that's a very significant point there, Professor Abhijit. Despite the fact whether there is a regime change or who's there in the Downing Street, what Mr. Mishra is referring to is that United Kingdom needs this FTA badly in terms of whosoever is in the power, because for their economic benefit as well. India is a big market, is a potentially big market which they would want to explore. And investment, that's also a very key significant aspect here.
I fully agree with what Ambassador Mishra said and what you're echoing as well. It really is a very strong political, diplomatic and commercial imperative for the United Kingdom to strike an FTA with India. But that has to be backed with the realization that if they try to replicate provisions of their FTAs with, let us say, Australia or New Zealand or European Union's provisions in its FTAs with India, then that is creating major impediments towards striking a deal. So the way forward should be to adopt a pragmatic approach in terms of what is doable, what India can commit to without jeopardizing its own economic future. And why I mention that is, if you look at the provisions in digital, I have already discussed. Similarly, provisions on environment. If those provisions are sought to be replicated with India, then there will be serious challenges within our country to nurture a vibrant domestic sector manufacturing climate-friendly products.
Okay.
So there has to be pragmatism, and that is the only way of striking a deal ahead.
Pragmatic approach. Quick concluding comments from you, Dr. Ratna, as well, in terms of what we can see in the coming days, weeks or months when we're talking about this negotiations on India-UK FTA.
Well, honestly speaking, I don't see any deal will be possible in a couple of days by Diwali, right? That's number one.
That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Even if the present Prime Minister would not have resigned in 3 days, you are not going to conclude the deal, because we are way behind where you will make a legal agreement. Of course, you can have certain, broader understandings. This is what we'll do, and it's a comprehensive agreement. It's not only goods. The second thing which I would point out, and perhaps I think not only Indians but even the UK is aware of, when we talk about these FTAs or regional trade agreement, you can sign tomorrow, but implementation will not begin tomorrow. And conclusion of coming to a free trade is also not going to be tomorrow or yesterday. It will be 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So the changes which you are going to look at, you are not going to look at those changes overnight, that overnight everything will change and everything will come into place.
It will be a gradual implementation.
It will be a gradual implementation, whether you are talking about liberalization goods, you are talking about liberalization services, bringing in investment. Overnight, you will not get billion of investment coming into India. It takes time. Or even when Indians have to go, even when we are talking about skilled workers going on, there could be severe consequences, because if you are looking at that, then what happens to the shortage of skilled workers in India, which will raise and you are looking at 5 trillion.
Indeed,
all those issues are there which needs to be debated, looked into, and then carefully graduated.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ratna, Professor Abhijit Das, and Mr. Jiten Nath Mishra as well, for sharing your views and insight with our viewers. As our experts were pointing out, of course, this deal, that is the free trade agreement between India and United Kingdom, which is being negotiated right now, will take some more time, not only given the political situation in United Kingdom, where the present Prime Minister Liz Truss has put in her papers, coming on the heels of her Home Secretary and her Chancellor as well resigning from their posts in the last few weeks. Now, that apart, of course, there are issues which will have to be dealt by both sides, negotiated well, debated, discussed, and a pragmatic approach, as our panelists were pointing out, from both India and United Kingdom. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments here and keep on bringing you the details and analysis as well. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television.